Welcome to Stripped Cover Lit. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here for another poetry discussion. The poetry discussion playlist now nearing 365 poems, which would be one for every day of the year. But this is the first poem on the channel from Rainier Maria Rilke, or Rainier, Ranier, Runier. I've heard it pronounced all three of those ways. Anyway, I am not here to tell you which way is the correct way. I did take a whole lot of German in high school, and I remember none of it. Day in autumn or autumn day. Depending on which translation you find, this poem will be titled one of those two things. This translation is by Mary Kinsey. Now, because it is translation, one of the things that is, I hesitate to say dangerous to do. What's dangerous about it? But one of the things which may be ill-informed if you are trying to squeeze out what might be the correct interpretation of the poem, though I do not believe in such things, would be to look too closely at word choice because of the translation of the nature of translation, I should say. So the poem in question, Day in Autumn, Autumn Day, reads as such. After the summer's yield, Lord, it is time to let your shadow lengthen on the sundials, and in the pastures let the rough winds fly. As for the final fruits, coax them to roundness, direct them on 2 days of warmer light to hail them golden toward their term, and harry the last few drops of sweetness through the wine. Whoever's homeless now will build no shelter. Who lives alone will live indefinitely so. Waking up to read a little, draft long letters, and along the city's avenues fitfully wander when the wild leaves loosen. This is not my favorite translation of this poem, but it will, nonetheless, do. The interesting thing to me about this poem is that we do seem to have an internal clock about the day. You have a circadian rhythm and whatnot. And this rhythm is not just about the day. This rhythm extends further to the year, whereby spring feels like the morning, summer is the day slash the work day, fall slash autumn is the evening, and winter is the night. That's how our years feel, isn't it? In fact, it used to be they simply from reading people's notes and diaries and et cetera, it used to be that before the advent of electricity, and indeed during the early, like, electricity didn't change people overnight, not quite like these things did, but people used to sleep longer, hours, in the winter. I can't do that now. Um, the world did not used to run, I don't believe, as pinpoint accurate as it does today, as it has to today. If you didn't go to work in the winter, maybe the store just didn't run. People weren't out anyway, but we are now. So winter is no longer as it was. Still, we seem to have this internal clock that it seems to be easier to work longer hours in the summer than it does in the fall, than it does in the winter, at least for me. But sensibility, or perhaps something of a biological metaphor, if that is, in fact, it feels like a natural metaphor, doesn't it? It extends from the day to the year, and further still, once more to the life scale, whereby spring is childhood slash early adolescence, summer is late adolescence through maybe your 30s through your 40s, wherever it is that you are having the productive and advancing years of your career, where you are getting further ahead through hard labor, as opposed to the knowledge that you have, which is built through the course of a career and may sustain you in your later career through um, not those physical feats that you were able to accomplish, but rather those things which you are able to know and work smarter instead of harder. Now, obviously, if you can work smarter while you're working so hard, it's the best. That's how people really get ahead in life. But anyway, evening, fall or autumn would be the evening. So we're looking here in this poem at the evening hours, and then winter, or I lost myself. Fall would be once you've had your successful career on the life scale. The fall metaphor is once you've had your successful career, once you have reared your family, right? If the family is your measuring stick for a successful life, and for many people it is, and probably for most people it should be, right? That's how civilization keeps on trucking. 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 30s and 40s is the summer years of your life. 50s, 60s, once you have your children leave the house and you are then the knowledge base for the family as opposed to the labor base for the family. That is where this poem takes place. And then winter, that is obviously the years of our decline. Those are the years that we are not able as much, not readily available as once we were. But if this is the metaphor being extended here, we are headed into the evening. We are headed into the literal fall. We are headed into the post laborious phase of life through whatever measure you want to, whatever metaphor, perhaps whatever measure of metaphor you want to see this poem. This stanza here becomes very troubling. Whoever's homeless now will build no shelter. Who lives alone will live indefinitely so. Waking up to read a little, draft long letters, and along the city's avenues fitfully wander when the wild leaves loosen. On the life scale of this metaphor, this is saying that, and this is why these metaphors are so beautifully coherent. On the life scale, what this is saying is that once you are through doing all of the hardest work that you can do, once you are through that summer season of your life, once you are through the laborious season of your life, whatever you don't have, baby, you ain't getting. That's rough. On the day scale, you've had those days where you crap out, right? You wake up, you maybe you were drunk the day before, maybe you did too much exercise the day before, maybe you did too much work the day before, maybe it's your day off now, right? And you wake up slow. And you kind of amble about, shuffle around. By the time evening gets there, by the time those later hours of the day get there, have you not really started your day? You're not going to. That's the day in the year frame once you are to closing those closing staves of the year. If you get there and you have not done what it is that you need to do to get through the winter, guess what? You might not get there. When I was in graduate school, what I was doing was I would wake up, I would go to the library for about 6 hours. Then I would go. So we'll just stick with a simple day. I would go to the library for about 6 hours. I would go to the gym, and then I would go home and type up the writing that I had done, type up the notes that I had taken, edit something from the day before, and that was my cycle, right? Spending so much time in a public library, you get exposed to a lot of homeless folk. Homeless folk hang out at public libraries because that's someplace indoors they're allowed to go. There was a couple homeless guys at the table next to me one day, and I will never forget this conversation. One guy I had seen pretty regularly the entire time I was there. It's just what he did. He went to the library and ate his lunch and etc. Very nice guy. One day and he was older. I mean, I'm talking, he looked mid 50s, probably he was mid 40s if this was the life he was living. And there was a younger guy there with him who I'd never seen before. And they were kind of talking shop. They were kind of talking strategy, things like that. And I will never forget. That older guy was so nice. I remember one day, probably it's not funny, but he was eating his lunch, and you know how you just happen to look up at someone. He was eating chips, and I had happened to look at him. And here I was, obviously studying, obviously reading, and he gave me the deer in the headlights look, like, oh, I didn't mean to upset you by eating my chip. Now, he didn't upset me or anything, but that is how considerate he was. That he didn't want to be in someone's. He didn't want to have distracted someone from what they were trying to do while he was eating his lunch, right? And he said to this guy, this newer guy, who was just, I guess, learning the ropes of homelessness, which, by the way, if you don't learn them in a year, you don't get year two. Here in the Midwest, especially. If you don't learn the ropes in year one, you don't get year two. In the summer, it's 105 degrees. In the winter, it's negative 30 degrees. And he's sitting there talking to him. And he says, very matter-of-factly, if I get through the winter, what I'm going to do is, and I have no idea what he said after that, because that phrase came out of his mouth so matter-of-factly. If I get through the winter, woof, woof, And that's just the year scale. Now, this guy was probably, like I say, mid-40s, mid-50s. What is this poem saying? If you have not gotten what you need by that time in life, what are the odds that you do? Now, I'm not saying it's impossible, but by those moments in our lives, that time in our timeline, everything that we have done has led us to be the person that we are by those moments. It will take gargantuan efforts to change. It will take gargantuan movements to get different outcomes from the life that we have built. Is that what is being warned here in this poem by Rilke? I think part of the utility to poetry is that poems are normally interesting or artful statements, but that's on the surface, right? That's on the surface, that's up top. What we're really doing with poetry is telling a truth, or as here, we're interpreting a truth. The reason they have to be so artfully done is that a lot of times the truths that we learn are very painful. Where are you in life? And what are the things that you want? Because if you are in that autumn season of life, and there is something on the massive life scale that you want, it takes maximum effort. And I'm not saying this in a preachy way. I feel myself very much careening towards that inevitability. Is that the message that we're getting here from Rilke? That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do on the channel, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button, because literature is all I do on this channel. There's poetry every Mondays. Right now we are reading through The Great Gatsby. We are going short story by short story through Ernest Hemingway's short stories. We are reading through Sylvia Plath, poem by poem, through the entire Big Yellow Book. That is all I have for this video, and I hope to have you back for the next.